before you.
All right. All right, everybody. We're live. Welcome everybody. Hopefully for everybody in the Midwest and East Coast as we get prepped for this crazy weekend that's coming our way with hopefully all the weather people are just wrong and it's not going to happen, but that's what I'm praying for.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't. I don't think. I think we're gonna have snow, at least where we are. Lindsay, you're in Texas.
we're in Texas and the governor has declared a state of emergency. So we're not prepared for snow and ice. So, Clint, I'm with you. Hopefully, the weather forecasters are
Yeah,
incorrect and we end up with sun and different outcome. But yeah, for us in Houston, 22 is a big deal. Our homes aren't fully insulated and we don't have the heavy winter gear and all the things. So I
that's
hope
right.
everyone stays weight,
I
please.
was just talking with a school from Houston and they were like, yeah, they're calling for the 20s on Monday. Their school might be closed
Yeah,
just for the yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But all right. Thanks everybody for hopping on. And we'll get started here in a minute. I'll just do some quick logistics, Tim, and then I'll turn it over to you to kick off the topic for today. And as with all of our sessions, they're going to be recorded. You can always go to the Montessori Foundation YouTube page; they're posted there. Zoom will send them out following about 24 hours following the session. You should receive the recording as well. And with all of our sessions, when you exit, there should be a pop-up survey. Let us know how you liked it, what you want to learn more about, if we can provide any additional assistance, whether it's software, consulting, or professional development. We ask you a few questions on there, and we'll be happy to reach out to you and get you some more information. So today, I think is going to be more of a conversation, if you will. I don't think we have some key things we want to go over in regards to leadership transition, not necessarily your standard webinar presentation. But I think these are more fun when they're conversation and engaging.
Mhm.
And even if that's you using the chat box and asking questions or answering, we love to have as much engagement as possible. I know Tim, you like to unmute if anybody wants to unmute, so that's also a possibility. So yeah, so don't be shy. Put up your hand. Engage with as much as possible. It makes these conversations even more valuable. So with that being said, Tim, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off for the topic today.
I think let's start with an assumption, which is even though everyone in a school is important, the research is very clear that the person who has the greatest influence on the school is the head of school or principal or director, whatever title they're given. And whatever they pay attention to, whatever they criticize, whatever they reward, whatever they punish, will rapidly change a school. We have a saying that a great head of school can build a school up over a matter of years from almost nothing, and a bad one can take a great school and drive it into the ground very quickly. Uh, Different people are good at different situations. Again, I happen to be from the Montessori Foundation. Dr. Pollock is also a Montessori educator and a long-time head of school and now a professor of Montessori leadership skills she's the provost at Sarasota University. What I think we really want to say is if your school, whether you're Montessori or Reggio Emilia, whether you're a public school, a charter school, a traditional school, a faith-based school, it doesn't matter. Every school needs great leadership. And the best leadership, in my opinion, is one that recognizes that they can't do it alone. They
Mhm.
do it with other people, and that they understand that they have many jobs, but I would suggest there are three great jobs. The great jobs are one, they have to be the ultimate articulator of the identity, the values, the vision of the school. They have to be able to talk it better than anyone else. And if they can't do that in an inspiring manner, in some way, shape, or form, different people do different things. That's their first job, is to
Mhm.
inspire a belief that this is a great school for me. The second is to go out and recruit great people to be teachers and staff and to turn them into a team. In other words, the head of school may have other people that help hire people, select people, check them out, and so forth. But ultimately, it's the head of school that has to make the final decision. And their job is to not only hire them and shake their hand, it's to go out and find them
Hmm.
because it's hard to find great teachers. And in the same way, the third great task is find great families and turn them into a community and inspire their confidence. Again, every family and every teacher is looking for something different. I'm not suggesting that one school is right for everyone, but for one school, they need somebody who is the right fit for them. And that's what today's topic is all about, succession planning, which is the idea that nobody is immortal. Sooner or later, everyone is going to retire or get a better offer or, pass away on the job. It really does happen.
Hmm.
And we suggest that it's a good idea for a school to have a plan of what they're going to do and when they're going to do it and how they're going to do it well in advance. And that's what Lindsay and Clint and I want to talk to you about today.
Tim, it reminds me of a quote. I believe it's attributed to the Disney Corporation, and it says, "A great organization doesn't plan for if someone leaves, they plan for when someone leaves." And I think this discussion today is really making sure that, whatever happens, whatever that impetus is for the transition, that the organization is positioned in such a way to maintain stability for the families, for the children, for the staff, and to sustain the work that that leader has invested their life in. I couldn't agree with you more when you talked about the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into building an organization can so easily be just decimated in an instant if someone comes in with a very different agenda or perspective, and there aren't those guide rails to maintain a sense of order. And of course, things will change, but like everything, we want to take steps that are thoughtful and well measured in those transitions.
And there's several things here. The first is, again, whether you're a Montessori school or a faith-based school, I think you would agree, every school has a unique culture. And
Absolutely.
figuring out what you need in your next head of school is really important. Some of you are going to be working with a school that is for profit and is privately owned. It may be owned by an individual or family. It might be owned by a corporation and be part of a big network. In my opinion, there's no difference between a one-person shop and a big company in terms of culture.
Hmm.
Culture is everything. And what we're really talking about is finding the right match. Because, for example, if you find someone who really comes in and upsets the apple cart, quite often you'll get a board or an owner who say, it's time to clean house and, we need to shake this thing up. My experience is that does so much harm so quickly. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean there doesn't sometimes need to be change, but we need to do it so we don't spook the herd. We
That's
need our
right.
families to be confident. We need our staff to be confident. And again, we can't wait until the board decides to fire someone or you get a resignation letter 2 months before the start of the school year from your head of school, or the head of school has a stroke and can't work it. You got to have a plan of what you would do if.
Hmm. If you have a car accident or there's a family member who needs your support and you need to take some time away, what is the backup plan? Just like we have, plans for evacuation for our families or your school, what's going to happen if you have to leave that organization? What's the plan of action? Do the people around you know who will pick up the responsibilities that you've been taking on? And, like you have indicated, Tim, leadership transitions, they are pivotal moments in a school's life. They can make or break an organization, even if, the change is temporary. Maybe I anticipate my change, my absence will be temporary. Very often, that temporary absence can lead to time away that's longer than I anticipated. And it's so much better for everyone, including the person who's needing the time away, so that they can focus on whatever emergency that they may be needing to deal with. If they know that they've equipped their team to step in and step up and cover those responsibilities.
One of the issues is the whole work-life balance issue. There's a big talk these days about the idea that we need to help our leaders to realize that they're not martyrs, they're not carrying the world on their shoulders. They need to have a life, they need to take care of the family. And that's certainly a good argument. But I would also argue that I see a lot of people that take on the head of school position. They have no idea the level of responsibility that they're going to be carrying on their shoulders. And the fact is, there is no weekend when you're head of school. You
That's
can
right.
have boundaries, but if the building has a fire or someone breaks in or the plumbing springs a leak, guess what? You're going to be at that school.
That's right. It might be 2 in the morning. Even as a public school principal, that meant I was running up to the campus because I had the keys and I had the code and I had, specific knowledge about my building and where the panels and access spots were. So a school leader has that unique responsibility to be the guide for that campus. And that means overseeing sometimes events and unexpected circumstances that take place at all hours of the day and night.
And some of them are going to be physical, like a break-in or a fire or flood. Some of them are going to be situations you could never in a million years imagine. For example, I remember in one of my own schools, we came in and took over the management of a school, and it turned out that their audited books were wrong. And in
Oh dear.
October, they were running out of money. Another example was I was on my honeymoon and I was in England and I got an email from my second in command saying, "You got a parent revolt here and you need to get back here as fast as you can."
Oh no.
Yep. And yet a third case was I was on vacation in the Caribbean, um, and I didn't have email. All I had was a telephone. I would call in once a day to the school. And I got told that a building that we were leasing from the local government, which was our high school, was going to be taken back to us within 12 months by the county government because they had found asbestos, uh, in some of the older schools within the district. So these are situations where you have no choice but to either drop everything or quickly change your plans to deal with a situation that's come up. And it could be anything
It
from
could be anything. Yes.
civil lawsuit, an injury, parent uproar, you name it. So I think the question we had to look at first is when do you do a succession plan? Do you do it when you've gotten your resignation letter, or do you do it in advance?
Well, for me, Tim, I advocate for doing it far in advance and to have systems in place for either short-term or long-term absences of the head of school, and to also think about how those plans will contribute to an ultimate succession, so that even if I'm away on vacation, my admin team can practice some of these skills. And if I were then to be called away, or if needed to take care of one of my aging parents suddenly, I could step away and not worry, I could focus on my family, knowing that my admin team is familiar, can pick up the plan. Back in the day, we had 3-ring binders, so we'd have a binder. Now it's all digital. But having your board or your PTO, having your admin team ready and involved in the development of the plan, in my experience, was very helpful. And I think succession planning is best implemented with some lead time so that it's not all of the sudden.
We were saying at the Montessori Foundation that clarity is the key to success. And another one of our sayings is money follows excellence. And what that's all about is this. When you think about independent schools, again, you may be independent usually means not affiliated with a church, certainly a private school, but I would argue that every school, really falls under this banner, including, a school like Garden Oaks, where you were a public school principal, Lindsay. You've also, I know, run private schools. The bottom line is all great schools are much more than their buildings, the number of books in the library, the number of science labs, the gym, even the great sports program. I mean, all of that's true. Your accreditation is all good. Really, the thing that binds it together is something that's roughly equivalent to the soul. The idea that there is a culture or a way of doing things, an identity that defines a school that has clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And having that in writing, so it's not just in one person's head, so that if that chef gets run over by a trolley, nobody knows how they made dinner.
Right.
We need a plan. We need to know what we do and why we do it and how we do it as much as we possibly can, which doesn't mean that it's as simple as a franchise master handbook. But on the other hand, I think having an operations handbook is not a bad thing.
Right. Well, I recently assisted a school that was going through a transition, and the head of school was also the founder and had been with the program for over 30 years. And, many of the things that the head of school was doing were second nature to them. They had, built this school from the ground up and had assumed so many responsibilities that people were just used to the head of school doing all the things. And one of the things that we worked on early on was really looking at where was the head of school spending their time most days, and writing down a list of responsibilities, all the things that a head of, we ended up with a three pages of items of things that this head of school was doing without even, it had, her tasks had risen to the level of automaticity. They were things that she just did because she was the head of school, not even thinking about who would I ever hand this off to. And so really looking at the time in the day and the specific tasks, looking over a week and then over a month, starting to think about, who else on my team might be my backup, and maybe who can I invite into some of these conversations and start to mentor people on my team so that we can have some time in this transition together to start preparing.
Now, what you're describing, Lindsay, is sort of the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory model of looking for Charlie. And I think that that whole idea of having a bench of people that we're bringing along who may or may not ultimately be given the job of the
Mhm.
next head of school, but the more institutional knowledge is out there in your team, not just your
Yes.
administrators, but among your teachers and your parents and your students, the better. We call these, again, we're Montessori educators. Some of you are Montessori educators too. But whether you're a Montessori educator or not, the bottom line is you want to have a model where as much institutional memory is around as possible, and you want to make sure the people who are going to make the final decision about who is given the job next appreciate the importance of not simply hiring someone who will upend it. That's another thing. Quite often in the business world, you bring in a new CEO and you kind of assume that she is going to get rid of the current people, sweep them out, and bring in her own team. You don't want to do that in a school because students have relationships with people, teachers have relationships with people. You can really do a lot of damage. One of the
Mhm.
things that led to the formation of the Montessori Foundation back in 1992 was by the 90s, we were seeing large numbers of American Montessori Society schools that had been founded in the 60s and the 70s, where now the head of school was either getting older and wanting to retire or wanted the school to grow and realized that she didn't have enough resources. So the school went nonprofit. They had a real board, and the feeling was we need help. What usually happened was the founding head was thrown out, and they brought in a business-minded person. I can't tell you how many non-Montessori leaders I've seen come into Montessori schools. Now, Lindsay, if I remember correctly, when you became a leader of a school, you were not a Montessori educator,
You are correct, Tim.
which is
Yes.
an important concept. Not everyone who runs a school, whether it's a Catholic school or a Jewish day school or whatever, needs to be first off a teacher. There are people who do a great job as leader of a school who are better at organizational leadership than at working with little kids.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you got to have someone who's good at being an institutional leader of your kind of school.
Absolutely. And I would add, Tim, that while I was not a Montessorian, I had founded a constructivist school based on Piaget's work. And so I think one thing that really helped me when I was getting started at Garden Oaks was that I had a deep appreciation for a constructivist approach to education.
Mhm.
And so I would encourage folks as they're looking for successors to find people who are aligned to the mission, the vision, and the values of the school in that decision. And Tim and I know you and I have often talked about, finding the right Montessori guides, and we can sometimes find a person who has a credential, whether that's Montessori or any other approach to education, but they may not be the right person for your school and your school culture. So I really emphasize to folks, look for the person who is aligned to your school culture, to the mission, vision, and values that you hold, and whatever approach you're taking in your school, make sure that that person is interested and dedicated and committed to learning more and or becoming credentialed in that specific approach. So while I was not credentialed when I started my job as a school principal, I did then pursue my Montessori administrator credential. I earned a master's degree in Montessori integrative learning. And then when I did my doctorate, I chose to study the impact of Montessori education in Texas public schools. So, I was bitten and became very interested in many deep ways about this specific approach to education and to learning. So again, I would just emphasize the importance of finding someone who is truly committed to your school and to learning more and representing your school in an authentic way.
I think that again today, I see that we just had a great question from Nick Schwarma asking, "How do you develop the entire curriculum?" That is a topic in itself. And Nick, I'm not sure whether you're talking about Montessori curriculum or another curriculum. You may want to add more in the chat. But that is a topic for another day because curriculum development is a major field. We also had an earlier comment or question asking where can a small business get affordable help to have a peer to talk to? And I think the answer, there is no one answer, but the Montessori Foundation was organized to provide just that kind of connection and network. And one of the ways we do it, by the way, is by having these twice a week webcasts for people who are not only Montessori educators, but people from the mainstream of independent school, because it's all one piece. And we're delighted to have anyone here.
And
Again,
Tim, I'm
mhm.
so sorry to interrupt. I see that you've dropped your contact information in the chat. I know the Montessori Foundation also can arrange for a consultant to meet with heads on a one-on-one basis
Mhm.
for a fee. And I know for myself, I have consulted with schools through the foundation. And I know the foundation is dedicated to making that an affordable um, prospect for schools. So if that's something you're interested in, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to Tim and talk about the particulars for your school because it can be very helpful. I work with a head of school right now. We meet every 2 weeks. And I think for her, it's so valuable to have someone to talk through specific um, examples of things that are going on at that school and to have a thought partner to just walk through some of those situations.
Yeah, I get this kind of stuff all the time where not only on a regular basis, like every week or every other week, but as needed. I mean, I get it just in the last 48 hours, I've had multiple people calling me about their tuition or about their agreement or about a need to change something in their agreement or dealing with an upset parent, how to respond to them. Having help is really, really valuable. And in the business world, this is called mentorship or coaching. And it is a
Mhm.
classic thing that many, many businesses have a business coach. Again, what we're talking about today, our main topic today, is succession planning. And I think what we're getting around to is before you have the need, you want to think about how would you do it? Who do we have now? And are we doing things to make sure that our current people in the administrative team, other than the head of school, have knowledge about how we do things here and why we do things? In other words, what's the culture? What's the tradition? Who are the people we call if the plumbing breaks, or what are the compliance issues we're dealing with the county or the state? Now, the more knowledge we get, the better. The next thing you want to think about is how do you avoid what I call the revolving door head of school? For example, when I retired from the Barry School back in 1993, I know our board had the best of intentions. They hired somebody who they thought would be a good fit as an interim head, but they've gone through, I think, almost 20 heads of school since I left in 1993.
Oh
Now,
my.
the average head of school lasts for about 3 to 5 years. But if you think about it, the number of years that have gone by, that's a lot of heads of schools. And
That's
in
a
the,
tremendous amount, tremendous number of transitions.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
sometimes every year, sometimes 2 or 3 years, and sometimes very, very different attitudes or values or objectives. In other words, they come in and they put their stamp on it. And again, our advice is whether you're for profit or nonprofit, whether you're a big school or a small school, whether you're public, charter, or private, you have a responsibility morally, if not legally, to continue on the core values and traditions on which you were founded. You want your
Mhm.
alumni, your donors, your staff members, your children, your families to feel like from the moment they first encounter your school until the day they graduate, and in every level, every classroom, it ought to be consistent as much as you possibly can. Keeping in mind that schools are made of people and people are difficult. and we're all different. But as much as we can, we want a choir singing from the same sheet music, right?
That's right.
We don't want a group of cats yowling in the night.
Tim, in the Q&A, I see that Regina Dyson, hi Regina, added this would make for a charrette style series to go deeper to identify, share, and co-design applicable concepts. Thank you, Regina. You're absolutely right.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, the whole idea of one, how do you achieve the clarity about who we are? To me, that could be done by the founder. It could be done
Yes,
by the owner or the board, but it's best done by very deep engagement of the whole community.
absolutely. Tim, Sandra McCoy is asking, what can heads of school do when a new board chair takes over, a parent? They're overbearing with requests and pushy with staff. How can that be communicated without becoming unprofessional? How do we keep that chair in check to keep the mission and vision in the forefront?
That is one of my favorite webinars to do. And maybe that'll have to be one coming up. Um, there's a lot to that, Regina. I mean, was that Regina that asked
That
that?
was Sandra.
Sandra. I think the bottom line is there is no power beyond the board. If the board elects a new chair and the chair decides that they're going to run roughshod over the head of school and they believe it's a good idea to yank your chain and make you, you know, produce reports and justify everything you're doing and attend endless meetings, there's not much you can do other than either comply, attempt to convince, or resign or wait to be fired. And quite often you get fired because boards love to fire heads of schools at times, not every board. But I think the bottom line is that's what we call a bad board. And it happens all too often. In fact, I'm working on a book that I call Board Beyond Belief, which is all about boards and how to create a good one and how boards go bad.
hmm And I think, proactively, what can be done is to make it very clear as an organization what the role of the board is. I would strongly recommend working with either the Montessori Foundation or someone who is another, person who is adept and experienced at board training. There should be a board manual so the board understands what their role is and the proper style of communication. I know that I have served on other boards, boards of schools, where in the board manual, it very specifically stated that board members were not to speak directly to staff, that they should take any concerns directly to the head of school. So having those parameters in place, having a consultant or a third party that can support you and the board in those conversations is really important. And I know that's work that the Montessori Foundation also does. So reach out to Tim for more information.
Yeah, we do specialize in this is our favorite topic, and it is a real issue out there in the world. Not only in Montessori schools, I've had many non-Montessori school heads be run wild with their boards. And I've also seen great boards that have done great things. So, building a great board is a fine art, and sometimes it's within your power to control, and sometimes it gets out of hand. You're welcome, Sandra.
We
So,
have an we have another comment. Will Ma Marino says, it's inspiring to hear you all. Being a small business going on with a bright little flame can sometimes be overwhelming when all around us very well funded businesses, ECE programs. Hiring and making sure we can compete with bigger schools is one of the important issues we are facing. We believe so much in our values, mission, and vision and appreciate all the help we can find. Thanks,
absolutely.
Ma.
So going back to the issue of succession planning, what we've said so far is one, it's going to happen sooner or later. It's not if, it's when. Number two, ideally it happens, in a planned manner. Lindsay says to a school, I think 2 years from now will be my last year, and we need to start planning now. I think that's the best way for it to happen. Obviously, it doesn't always happen that way. Life happens. People can pass away. People can need to resign for various reasons. It has nothing to do with politics or interpersonal conflict. So the bottom line is we need a plan. That's what today's all about. I think, Clint, I've either given you or I will give you a written document with a long essay for the
Yep.
people attending or signed up about what we believe people need to do. But I think talking it through further, the next step is figuring out what kind of person do you need? If we've given some thought to what kind of school we are, and we have some kind of strategic plan, this is what we're working to achieve. This is and some knowledge of who we are. How many kids do we have? What's our financial position? What's our cash flow budget? Are we really managing the pennies? uh, do we have a sense of what our enrollment is likely to be next year if all goes well? In other words, things like, for example, I have a school right now that is the good news is more kindergartners are staying than they expected. The bad news is they don't have space for everybody, and they're not sure what to do about that. So again, ideally, we have a plan for this years in advance. That's ideal. In the real world, you do it the best you can, but you start looking at the issue of succession by saying, well, what information do we need to have in our pocket ready to go if we need to go looking for a new head? And one of the things is, what kind of person do we need to run our school? What skills and experience? What qualifications? They need a doctorate. Does it need to be in Montessori? Can it be in Doctor of Divinity? Does it have to be a doctorate? Do they have to run a school like ours? How would we know that someone was a good fit for our school? And again, I work with schools all the time where they just go willy-nilly out there and say, I just hired someone. I'm so happy. And I say, oh my God, how'd you find them? What made them qualified? That you like them? That they were willing to love you? I mean, that's not the same thing as the right fit.
That's right. Tim, another aspect of the selection process, some organizations use personality profiles. So I know the DISC assessment is one that I've seen some organizations use. We encourage our folks at Sarasota to take the Clifton Strengths Finder as part of the admissions process, and we carry that through the rest of the programming. But being aware, I think, of who you are and what the organization is looking for can also be an important step for both sides, right? For both the applicant and the school. And Tim, in the chat, I see a message from Betty, and she says, we don't have a board, just Sheila and I. And I want to make sure that if you're a small school out there and you're listening, have a succession plan. Even if you opened that school with your best friend, and you've been in business for years, you've still got to have something in writing. And let me tell you why. I have a friend who opened a school with a dear friend of hers. It was the two of them. They built their program up. And when it came time for one of the partners to retire, she did not consult her partner of 20 years. She found a buyer for her interest in the school and sold her half to a complete stranger. And so, and I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I'm sure this maybe would never happen again. But it was such a shock to the remaining partner because my friend said that, her longtime business partner walked in and said, "Oh, hi." I'll say just her real name is not Donna, but her longtime partner walked in and said, "Hi, Donna, I've been talking about retiring and I found a buyer, so you're in good shape. Here's the new partner, and he's bought out my half, and so I want to make sure, to introduce you and get everything situated." And it was a complete shock. So have things in writing, even if it's only one other person that you are working with. And I think in this situation, it was well-meaning. She thought she was doing a good thing. She wanted to, help with the transition, but she didn't consult her partner, her business partner, and it didn't work out in the end. And I'm sure there are situations where maybe that can work, but as you said earlier, Tim, clarity is key. Having those structures and that information, the agreements and expectations in writing is essential because people forget what was said in the past. And even well-meaning may make missteps that can be detrimental to the organization and to the relationship.
Something that may help as we think about this. And again, small school, I happen to know Betty and her daughter Sheila's school, um, Leap International in Albuquerque area. Um, they're a small school, they're a boutique, and it could be that they'll run it until the last one's ready to let it go, and they might just say, "Well, I'm going to close it down, or I'm going to hand it over to my best friend or a teacher." There's no wrong answer. But I think what we're trying to do is make sure, as you said, that whatever happens, it's not something traumatic for the children. And using
Precisely.
that metaphor of the children is not a bad one. So I want you to imagine that your longtime partner has passed away and you're starting to date again, and you need to introduce them to your children who are not little babies. And they're going to have an opinion. And you want to make sure that, the family isn't torn apart because they may have children too. And you may have a blended family. And with what is it, 12, you get egg roll. Idea the Brady Bunch, the merge of the
Right?
families. You want to make sure that this really works well, because quite often a new leader will come and they'll have someone that comes with them who they think very highly of. Maybe they won't, or maybe they'll come in and they'll find someone they really identify with, and that person will become more equal than other people. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. So you get an in group and an out group. You need to figure out how are we going to do this process so that not only the head of school who's leaving feels honored, and that you're doing a logical search, and the people who are ultimately able to make the decision on their own, the owners or the board, that they're feeling like they've done their due diligence. You also need to ask, how do we do this so that our students, our parents, and our teachers feel seen and heard?
Mhm.
You don't get a rebellion. I see we're getting some feedback here.
Ma is responding to Betty's post. Ma said, "We started our backyard after being Montessori teachers for 14 years. Now, a small preschool in our community. It's so good to feel empowered listening to all the stories and words of wisdom from real experience."
Yeah. My mother started a school, Ma, with 13 kids in grandma's basement, and it grew into an 850 student school. And there's no wrong answer, by the way. I know that Sheila and Betty like it to keep it small. That's part of their ethos. That's a legitimate option. Um, the Newgate school that I ran for many years, we deliberately tried to keep it pretty small. Barry School was pretty big. There's no wrong answer. But the trick is to be the very best you that you can be. That's what we're trying to do. So we're talking about having clarity about what kind of person do you need. You have to have clarity about the skills, the previous experience, the previous education they need to be qualified. You need to next ask, well, how are we going to get the word out And when the resumes begin to come in, what are we going to do with them? How do we know who to invite to school? And do we invite, what do you do? And again, I would suggest you it's a lot like you're a widow or widower and you're thinking about getting remarried, you got kids, and you're trying to reintroduce this new person into your life. You want your children and your sister and your mother and father, whoever's around, you want them to be okay with this and feel like you haven't lost your mind. So we're trying to ask, one, how do we put the word out? And how do we communicate why you'd want to come and look at our school? Because, man, there are so few good people compared to the number of schools that are in need of good leadership. So, how do we do that?
Well, in some cases, Tim, I've seen schools that purposely choose an interim so that there's a bit of a buffer between the previous head and the person who's coming in. So it gives the community time to accept the idea that there is a change in leadership, and gives a little time for the organization so that there's not always that direct comparison of, oh, well, we did things differently when Lindsay was here, right?
Mhm.
So I have seen schools that have developed a model where they have this interim come in. The interim may be there through the selection process, and then the interim knows, their contract ends in 6 months, right? So there's time for that community to go through that time of grieving, which is part of the process, grieving for that person who's leaving. Um, and there might be a couple of people who, are really dealing with that loss in deep ways. So that kind of clears the space for that new leader then to come in after everyone's a day. And then that person starts after that 6 month sort of break. And I think of gardening. Sometimes the land has to be fallow for a little bit before you plant again. Um,
Let's talk a little bit more about interim heads. From my
yes.
experience, an interim head usually isn't going to be for 6 months, except in the public school system, where they quite often will put someone in temporarily until the next available qualified principal is available to be placed into the position. But to search for a head of school for most of our schools is realistically normally a minimum of 6 months, and that's if it's the right 6 months. Like right now would be too late for most schools to find a new head of school. That doesn't mean you couldn't find anybody, but usually the kind of person you're going to find is an interim head capable person. In other words, not necessarily your keeper, but could be your transitory person who you date for a year and just don't do anything serious and whatever. On the other hand, interim heads, that's a whole profession. There are people that go around the world
Mhm.
and that's what they do. They come in, they serve as interim heads, and they're doing several things, one of which is helping people to get used to the fact that the longtime head of school who passed away or retired or got fired isn't there anymore. So the first thing is processing. It isn't the rules are changing.
Yes.
Number two, it could be that what they're there is to be a caretaker, to do no harm, to make sure the ship keeps running correctly while the board and the community do a well-crafted search for the next head of school, which is a
Uh-huh.
very, very thoughtful process. It should take about a year to a year and a half normally.
Mhm.
The third kind of interim head is a change agent, and they're typically brought in to do the really unpopular and difficult things to put a ship back on the right course. It could be the school has gotten itself into debt. It could be that there is a loss of confidence in the school because of uneven leadership. It could be that there just was some kind of uh, controversial decision made. We saw a lot of that with COVID, with people that either insisted that people wear masks or people who insisted that they didn't have to wear masks. There were people who were angry on all sides. And that goes on periodically in every school. There's just a turmoil of some sort. So change agents are another kind of head of school. And yes, they are typically brought in for a specific period of time. They usually are not local. You're going to have to find them a place to live for a year or whatever, 6 months. They may be more expensive than your typical longtime head of school. And they are highly, highly specialized people. Uh, and they can be hard to find. So again,
Mhm.
if you ever need one, there are several national companies that schools turn to. One is Carney Sandoz. Uh, I think very highly of them if I was not a Montessori school. I don't love them for Montessori schools because, in general, they tend to be um, much more comfortable putting people into a school. And they're so professional. I mean, this is a major group of head hunters for the school industry. So they tend to inspire confidence in boards, and the people they bring in may or may not be the right fit for your school. That's one of the groups that the Barry School experienced. And again, I don't mean anything negative about Carney Sandoz. They do the best they can, and they're good for most schools. Just be sure they're good for your school.
Mhm.
In the Montessori world, there's something called Metro Consulting out of the Rockville, Maryland area. There are probably other groups around. The Montessori Foundation does this as well. It is not our primary business, but we're certainly happy to do it. I can tell you, I was talking to a charter school in Oregon, and they wanted to have our help in helping them find a new head. And they chose a local nonprofit consultant who they thought could help them recruit someone locally. And, who knows? I'm sure it will be fine. The long and short of it, what you're trying to avoid is what we call the revolving door of people
Mhm.
that come in, they look like they're going to be a good fit, and a year later, your community is in turmoil, and they're demanding that somebody do something about this new head of school.
Agreed, Tim. I would strongly recommend avoiding the revolving door and avoiding that sort of knee-jerk reaction and panic in hiring. It's much better to take your time. I know, Tim, you've often said it's better to, date for a long time and really get to know the person than to marry someone in haste, right?
Mhm.
Because I have seen schools where maybe the head had a family emergency, they gave a 2 week notice, if that, and they were gone. And the school didn't have a plan of action in place, didn't feel comfortable promoting the assistant to the head of school. And they ended up hiring someone in haste and really regretting it. So it's better to be, fully transparent with your families, to let folks know that you want to be thoughtful and take your time and find the right person, and keep them apprised of the progress as you're going, whether that's with an interim head or whether that's asking the admin team that's on site to take up specific roles that you see need to be addressed during this search for the head of school. But again, take your time because all too often that haste then becomes the revolving door. Hired someone quickly, you think, okay, whew, got that done. This position's filled. We've got a head of school. And in the end, you end up with someone that does more harm than if, maybe something would have taken a little longer to get done, but it might have been done right. So take your time in this process, and really be clear with the criteria that you're looking for. Don't settle for, just, oh, well, they'll be fine. Settle for the person that can say, this person met most, if not all, of the criteria that we have set forth based on the experience and the vetting process. We believe that this person will be the best fit. Go into that relationship with confidence that you've done your homework, you've set up structures and systems that will make both parties successful.
So there is so much more we could talk about, including how do you onboard the new person? How do you communicate with your community as this process is going on? How do you make an intelligent decision? How do you check the references? How do you know that someone's going to be the right fit? It really, really does take time. And I must add that in this market, and this market has been this way for at least 20 years, the good heads of schools are so hard to find. There's so few well qualified, experienced people that what we usually do is we put a teacher in a position and we make them head of school, and that can work. But quite often, a teacher is going to identify with other teachers, and they're going to have a hard time making the tough choices or saying no. And a large part of what a head of school has to do is say yes or say no, and say no in such a way that when you tell them to go to hell, they actually say, "That's great, and can you give me directions?" In other words, they're grateful. They're not resentful. Um, we can easily go into more depth if you want. There's a major, major course I teach on this subject that is the same thing I use when a school hires the foundation to do it, because we know how much is involved. It is normally a year or more of a process, and the consequences of making a mistake are so severe that we would say, marry in haste and repent at leisure, as Lindsay reminded us. And if you want, let us know, and we can do more on this topic. I also want to remind you that there was a question was asked earlier about a board, and it could be that you'd like us to do some webinars on boards, because I think those are topics that are near and dear to our heart. How do good boards get good things done, and how do bad boards get out of control, and how can you help bad boards become good boards? Because it does happen. They're not bad people, they mean well. But I think that's probably about all our time this week. Let me just see if anyone has any last questions or comments. Nothing new
We
is
do have a
guaranteed.
comment from Soraya requesting that we continue this topic next week.
We certainly could. Can the other people on the line weigh in? Is this a topic you'd like to hear more on?
Betty adds, this has been wonderful. She's taken a lot of notes. Ma says yes. Danielle says yes. Amy, yes. Sandra, yes, please. All right.
All right. Well, I guess next week we'll do more of. And I do have a step-by-step slideshow that I could share if we want to do that, or we can just do open discussion. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, Lindsay, and the audience. Do you want open, or do you want practical, step-by-step, do this, do that, whatever?
I think the practical step by step might be the place to start. Yeah, Michelle says step by step.
Okay. And again, having done this myself, I can only say to you, if your school's actually in this process, don't try to do it yourself. Pay the money. It is the cheapest thing to do in the long haul. A great head can build a school up to greater heights, and a bad head, or at least bad for you, can do harm like you could not believe. You don't need to go through that.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got a lot of requests for the step by step, Tim.
Okay. Well, next week, step by step.
Sounds great. Well,
All right,
y'all stay warm out there. We'll see you next week.
and tell your friends about this. If you find this useful, remember this is a free resource. You can always watch the recordings, but it's so much more fun when you're really online.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Clint.